the vision is to really believe that the best gift I can give my congregation is a transformed self, how does that play out in the way I organize my day-to-day life as a pastor, as a leader?
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't have a brilliant answer to that. I think, what the church has said for 2,000 years up until very recently in Protestantism is rule of life.
Hmm.
That's the ancient historic church answer to that question is you craft a rule of life that is conducive both to your personality and to your cultural context, the city you live in, and to your day and age and era, of kind of late Western world and or particularly to a COVID-19 kind of crisis. And that rule of life has to be responsive and open-ended and not legalistic. It has to have some mutability to it, but basically you come up with a trellis to the vine, and that's where that language came from. Rule, or the ancient Latin word was regula, and there's dispute over it, but most scholars argue that it was the word used in Latin for the trellis under a vine in a vineyard. So if you've ever been to a winery, think of a beautiful vineyard, you think of a vine, a plant, underneath it is always a
Hmm.
trellis. And that's because without this trellis, this kind of support structure to undergird it, a vine will languish, it might even die, it will bear a fraction of the fruit that it has the potential to bear. It will be vulnerable to wild animals, to damage, to human beings. And the ancients said, all right, Jesus' core teaching was John 15, abide in the vine and you will bear much fruit. That's Jesus' most in-depth teaching on spiritual formation. And he's basically saying that we bear fruit, which Paul later defines in his riffing on John 15 and Galatians 5 as love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, goodness, faithfulness, self-control. We bear that fruit through living relational connection to God
Hmm.
by abiding and resting and making our home in the inner life of the Trinity itself. And so that's at a metaphoric level. And the ancients said, all right, practically the way we do that is we come up with our rule of life. We need a regula, we need a trellis. Just like a vine needs a trellis, to abide in the vine, we need a support structure, a schedule, and a set of practices and relational rhythms that enable us to make our home in God and come to rest in
Hmm.
God and really live from a relational connection to the inner life of God himself and Father and Son and Spirit. So that's like not a new answer. That's what people have been saying for 2,000 years. But I just think that's the answer. You have to come up with a rule of life that is specific to the West and specific to the city you live in, specific to your personality, and specific to your role as a pastor. So there's certain things in my rule of life that would make no sense if I was a plumber or a journalist or an entrepreneur, but they make a lot of sense for me as a teaching pastor. And that would be different if I was a different type of pastor. And so there's no one size fits all approach. There are best practices like Sabbath or morning prayer, life in community. But yeah, I think we structure a rule of life, and we have to make sure that relationships are a key part of that rule of life, because we
Hmm.
change in relationship, from relationship by relationship, both with Jesus and with Jesus people. And to bifurcate the two is, I think, a misnomer and a fool's errand.
Hmm.
So our rule of life has to include real deep relationships, which is often hard for pastors. Pastors are often
Yeah.
social, but not relational, or they're extroverted, but they're not actually in deep, mutual, little to no power differential, mutual accountability relationships of self-giving love. And man, that is, if you have to have that as a base with Jesus and with a few
Hmm.
other people.